So, you're Spider-Man.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Charlie. This will be my full Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man Episode 1 and Episode 2 video. There's a bunch going on, so many Easter eggs and references for the classic comics, and a bunch of big changes too. So I know that's probably one of the biggest questions is why does it look so different? Is this set in the MCU? Is it set in another universe? It is set in another universe. Also that they can play on a lot of classic tropes, both from the MCU, like a lot of Captain America Civil War going on here too, with a lot of twists, like it's Norman Osborn becoming his mentor instead of Iron Man. I'll be doing videos every week, so if you're brand new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the videos. It has been so long since I've been on camera this much, I'm going to have to go out and buy a whole bunch more Spider-Man shirts for all these episodes. And probably one of the most notable things is they've already renewed the show for Season 3. They said that they're in the middle of animating Season 2, so it sounds like they're going to release Seasons 1 per year. Really hope that they had actually done that for X-Men 97. Like, we're going to have to wait till 2026 for Season 2. But the title of Episode 1 is Amazing Fantasy, obviously a reference to Spider-Man's first appearance in the comics, Amazing Fantasy number 15. They've been using that scene of him saving Harry from the bullies as a comp to the cover of that issue too, and it shows up in the newspaper at the end of the episode. They start with a very Saturday morning cartoon-sounding version of the Marvel Studios fanfare because this is an animated series and it's a Marvel Animation logo. And in the background of the logo, instead of the live-action stuff, it shows different scenes from all the animated series going all the way back to the classic 1960s Spider-Man series. There's a bunch of What If, a bunch of X-Men 97 in the background, even some scenes from the Silver Surfer TV show back in the 90s. Fun fact too, all those 90s shows are specifically canon to the X-Men 97 universe because that's sort of like a 1990s Marvel universe. But they start the episode with a view of Manhattan and the Avengers Tower from the perspective of Queens because that's the borough of New York City that Spider-Man lives in. They also use the same font that the Russos used during Captain America Civil War because this is happening about 6 months before Civil War in the MCU, just like the MCU Spider-Man origin story. They never actually bothered to show us the spider bite of Tom Holland's Spider-Man or his origin story. They sort of brush past it and sort of allude to it in a lot of the later movies. But essentially, this series started life being the freshman year of Tom Holland's Spider-Man, but they decided to change it so that they could use whatever characters they wanted and do a lot more classic stuff from the comics with big twists. Really good example of that, probably the best example, is the fact that Norman Osborn is here with Harry instead of him being in the MCU, which didn't happen until much later during Spider-Man No Way Home with a much bigger multiverse twist. So if it wasn't clear, this should be pretty obvious. This is set in a completely separate universe, meaning that the X-Men can exist in this universe already, the Fantastic Four can show up. There's some Fantastic Four Easter eggs during the episodes too, making me think that they do exist somewhere on this Earth. But notice the Avengers Tower looks like it did circa Avengers Age of Ultron because even though this takes place in an alternate timeline, it's set around the same time period of Tom Holland's MCU Spider-Man got his spider bite, and during Spider-Man Homecoming, the Avengers Tower had just been sold to, as we find out in the Thunderbolts trailer, Val. Spider-Man wakes up having fallen asleep reading the Amazing Fantasy comic book. The cover, obviously a big Easter egg too, is from the real life issue number 14, one right before he debuted as Spider-Man, because today is literally the day that he gets the spider bite. It does take a little getting used to the way they animated the series. I still think that the X-Men 97 animation is some of the best animation that Marvel has done thus far in the Disney Plus era of Marvel stuff. But the way they explained it, in general, they wanted the series to feel like a Steve Ditko drawn Spider-Man comic come to life. So all the character models are meant to look more like classic Steve Ditko era, and during the end credits, it gets a little bit more literal too. They literally animate comic book pages into the actual end credits. We find out that Uncle Ben has already died here, still wondering what happened to MCU Uncle Ben too, but I think the idea is that a lot of his origin story here is meant to be mostly the same as Spider-Man in the MCU with a couple twists, like for instance Norman Osborn, Harry Osborn. Also the whole twist with how he actually gets the spider bite, we will get to that in a second. Notice in her car, they have an Iron Man hood ornament, Iron Man selling merch based on himself, which sounds about right. If somebody in the Marvel Universe is going to be earning money based on your likeness, it might as well be you. And I'm not totally sure, but usually when you see a license plate inside a Marvel anything, doesn't matter where it shows up, it's usually a comic book Easter egg. But there's also a Fortnite Spider-Man map with that exact number where Spider-Man saves the city, so it could also be a reference to that. Him wanting to play with robots at Midtown High is meant to foreshadow his internship at Oscorp because he wants to make it to the robotics lab. I think it's also a lot of foreshadowing for Norman Osborn's Green Goblin tech too. Like there's a lot of Oscorp tech just that permeates the city. We will probably eventually see him running around in an actual Green Goblin suit with a glider. When he mentions having a nice distraction from all the bad stuff recently, that's obviously Uncle Ben's death. They reference him a little bit, but just a little bit. I don't expect to hear a whole lot about him for the rest of the series. But the other obvious big change here too is that Uncle Ben died before Spider-Man got his powers. On his way into the school, Doctor Strange drops through a portal fighting this universe's version of Venom. Notice the green coming out of the portal too, so not really clear where they came from, like where they were fighting before this, but it could be another dimension, like another universe. They don't actually call this Venom during the episode, they just call it a symbiote in the end credits, but it is meant to be a version of a symbiote. We will see what kind of storyline they try to do for Venom just in general over the season. I have not seen anything beyond episode 2, like I'm watching the episodes just like everybody else is watching them, a couple per week. We will probably get bigger teasers heading into future seasons, like I don't think that they're going to blow through their entire Venom storyline in season 1. Eventually, at some point, Peter has to get that symbiote. But the other big twist here is that during their fight, the spider that bites him also comes from wherever that other universe is, or wherever they just came from. So it's a very Miles Morales, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse kind of twist, where the spider that bit them come from other universes. A lot of Doctor Strange's spells are the same spells that he uses in the MCU. He calls one the Shield of Seraphim. He uses it in the MCU and in the comics many times. Turns himself into astral form to let the truck pass through him, and he still has the Time Stone because this is set before Avengers Infinity War. Peter saves Nico while Doctor Strange uses his extra arms like he did during Infinity War against Thanos, and then Peter actually gets the spider bite. Most of you will remember Nico from Runaways or from the comics. The showrunner said that they almost used Jessica Jones here instead of Nico as Peter's man in the chair on this series. Jessica Jones in the comics does have history with Peter, but in the MCU version, it's a completely different vibe. We will actually see Netflix Jessica Jones come back in the MCU eventually, probably through Daredevil Born Again in some future season. Maybe they'll reference her too, because all the Netflix stuff is canon to the MCU. Daredevil Born Again is basically like Daredevil Season 4. We will actually be talking about episodes of that pretty soon. I'll be doing episode videos just like I did for the classic Daredevil series. Cannot wait to see Punisher come back and just wreck a whole bunch of people. On the show though, I don't know if Nico already has powers or she will get powers eventually. It might just be a secret that she keeps too, where first it's all about her learning Peter's secret, like, oh, you're Spider-Man, you're the person that's doing all this, that's why you're sneaking around all the time. But at some point, she'll probably also get powers too, because why would you do Nico if you weren't going to give her powers? One of the other important details too is that the spider that bit him does not die, crawls into someone else's backpack at school, and that's the last you see of it, but it's probably not the last we will see of it on the TV show, like the spider will be important in some future episode. Kinda wondering what they're going to use that for in the future. Will it bite other people and give them Spider-Man powers too? Then they play the regular intro theme song for the show. It's called Neighbor Like Me, as in Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, which is the name of the show, but it's also the name from the comics too. Most of you probably remember the theme song is a remix version of the classic 1960s animated Spider-Man theme song.
Spider-Man, Spider-Man, does whatever a spider can.
During the intro, though, they basically do a speed run of his first couple months as Spider-Man because there's a time jump after the opening credits, so you're basically watching what happens to him right after this for the next couple months, where he slowly figures his powers out, builds his mechanical web shooters, and the early versions of his homemade suit. The flipping pages is the comic book effect, but a lot of the panels here are meant to be copies of actual real-life comic book panels. There are a ton of Spider-Man suits from the comic book panels too. It looks like they're all his proto-versions of him slowly designing different suits, and some of them I know that he's going to be showing up in later in the series too, just because they showed up in a bunch of concept art. Most of these are either based on versions that are directly from the comics or they're very accurate to versions from the comics. He swings out of the panel wearing his first real homemade suit that he lands on, and the building that he stops on is the Oscorp Tower, which we wind up going to in episode 2. All these characters are just his closest friends, and because of the way the spider bite went down in a very different way, like that's the point of divergence where like his timeline goes in a vastly different direction than MCU Spider-Man. So instead of meeting Ned Leeds and MJ, he winds up meeting Nico, they become best friends, he meets Harry Osborn and all these other characters too. So his life takes a dramatically different turn than MCU Spider-Man. The way the showrunner explained it is that he does not meet Ned or MJ on this show, like for all intents and purposes, they do not exist on this TV show. Harry's going to become one of his best friends, just like the classic comics. Pearl Panigan is a relatively new comic book character, but she's also his love interest in the comics. We will see what happens with the two of them in the future, because Lonnie Lincoln, who also becomes one of his best friends, is also Tombstone in the comics. They're kind of using him in the Flash Thompson role on this series, but the big twist being that he actually makes friends with him instead of becoming Peter's bully. There's a lot of foreshadowing in his language, like keeping his options open in the future, like he's hoping to break out of this lifestyle, and then you have Norman Osborn, who seems like he's testing out a lot of his Oscorp tech on a lot of underprivileged youth. So it just seems like at some point, Lonnie Lincoln is going to wind up in some sort of Tombstone arc running afoul of Norman Osborn or some other twist on his origin from the comics. They only feature a couple of his classic comic book villains in this first couple of intros here, like the Scorpion is the first big one. Then we get the time jump to a few months later. He started to get used to his powers, but still doesn't completely understand how everything works yet. Still can't make it to his train on time, but because his powers make him vastly stronger, he can bounce off the car like it's no big deal. Spider-Man doesn't have a true healing factor the way Wolverine or Deadpool do, but he does heal faster than a normal person, just like Captain America heals a little bit faster. You guys can let me know what you think of the web slinging effects on this. There's always a lot of criticism of the live-action MCU web slinging compared to, say, like Andrew Garfield's web slinging. I'm a little more hopeful heading into like the next Spider-Man trilogy, like Spider-Man 4, 5, and 6. That'll be one of the things that they really work on because a new director is coming onto the series. But he winds up being late to school again because he stops to help Harry Osborn from some bullies who in this universe seems like more of a social media influencer whose family just already happens to be super rich because his dad is Norman Osborn. Really interesting real-life detail here. So the person who's playing Stevie Sherman, this character here, is actually the NPC Miles Morales guy in real life who got cast, I think because of all of his Miles Morales social media posts. So big ups to this guy, that's actually pretty cool. And they're basically trying to live stream them beating up Harry. Notice the chat while this goes down too. There's a bunch of Easter eggs in their chat. There's mentions of the Avengers, which is ironic because Peter does become an Avenger inside the MCU. Kick-His-Ass Seabass is from the Dumb and Dumber movie, so we got some movie fans in chat. Getting beat up by a guy wearing hockey pads is a Batman Dark Knight joke, so getting some DC jokes here, but I don't think that makes Batman canon to this universe. Screwball is also a big Easter egg too. She's a villain from the comics who also live streams her crimes, which is something that people do in real life, just like these bullies here. People do that all the time. It's ridiculous. Why would you live stream your crimes if you weren't a psychopath? Then we find out that all the kids at Midtown High started going to a different high school because of the Doctor Strange Venom fight just destroyed most of the school, so now they're all going to Rockford T. Bales. We get a little more Uncle Ben history. He and May would go on dates and have Pearl Panigan babysit Peter when he was younger. In class later, he also draws his blue and red original suit from the comics, which he'll probably eventually make for himself at some point in the series. Maybe like the very last episode, there'll be like a teaser for that. Maybe the beginning of season 2. There's like a billion suits that they feature in that intro. He's probably going to be wearing most of them throughout the series. The actual very first suit in Amazing Fantasy 15 was more black and red. The Spider-Man Far From Home suit that he made for himself that they call the Advanced suit, that was meant to be an Easter egg for that original Steve Ditko red and black suit. When people typically think of the classic Spider-Man original suit, they're talking about the blue and red suit, and that didn't come till a little bit later when Amazing Spider-Man #1 happened. He sneaks out of class again to stop the robbers. Nico also clocks him in a lot of the end credits. Like, you always see her looking at him, sneaking out of class. Eventually, she will figure out what he's doing. Like, oh, you're Spider-Man. This is why you're always late for everything. Basically the same way that Ned Leeds in the MCU accidentally found out that Peter Parker was Spider-Man. Some of you probably spotted this Easter egg too. When he's swinging around, he passes by Kleb from Spider-Man Homecoming, who also had a cameo in the Shang-Chi movie. They pass a bus ad for Bluefin Breakdown 2, which seems like a reference to Red Dead Redemption 2. Maybe that's just because the showrunner is a big fan of that game. And the whole idea with this car save, the bus save, is it's meant to be the exact same video that Iron Man showed him during Captain America Civil War, but in animated form. Like I said, this is basically meant to proceed mostly like the MCU Spider-Man origin story with a couple big twists. So a lot of these scenes are based on Captain America Civil War scenes. Lonnie then picks Peter as his lab partner because he so aggressively wants to get out of the place where he's living right now, like the poor lifestyle, like he wants to have a really bright future, so he actually does want to work really hard. Basically causing Peter to do a complete 180 on him, like he used to hate the guy because he took his crush from him, but now suddenly he's like his best friend. My assumption is that they're also building towards some big event where eventually he does turn into Tombstone and Spider-Man is forced to take him down, and that'll be the big conflict between them. Like, you're my friend, I can't take you down, but you're also doing a lot of really terrible stuff. Sort of like a Captain America and Bucky situation where like Bucky was still in full Winter Soldier mode until Captain America helped him. That was what I think was going on when all this talk of Lonnie saying, I want to have options for my future. I think one of those options is going to be him turning into Tombstone, whether he wants to or not. When he tells Pearl not to forget her goggles, that means she's on the swim team at school, but also she becomes the Wave character in the comics. We will see if that happens on the TV show. You have to remember this is based on a lot of classic Spider-Man comics and modern comics, so about 90% of the characters that show up in the episodes also have some sort of alternate identity in the comics as either a supervillain or superhero. We get a little more backstory on Lonnie's history. When he goes home, he gets profiled by a police officer a little bit, and then we find out that his family is just super poor, and that's one of the reasons why he wants to be such a success with his future. You also notice there's a copy of the Daily Bugle on their table with Peter on the front cover saving Harry, that pose from Amazing Fantasy number 15. Peter winds up helping the shop owner capture and then release the thief, trying to show some mercy. That'll also probably help him in the future too, where like he pays it forward and then other people wind up helping him in return. Giving him the free pizza, I think is also meant to be a Pizza Time reference too, like Tobey Maguire Spider-Man pizza references. When he finds the DVD player to take home, this is meant to be basically the events of Captain America Civil War right before we saw Spider-Man show up on screen, because the whole rest of the scene when he walks in, the music that they play, the music track, is the same music track that they play during Captain America Civil War. The only difference in this scene here is that it's Norman Osborn instead of Iron Man. If you couldn't tell, Norman Osborn is being played by Coleman Domingo, who a lot of people actually thought might become the new recast version of Kang the Conqueror during Avengers Doomsday. We will see if that winds up happening. But he did say that he was talking to Marvel about doing live-action characters, not Norman Osborn, but like other live-action characters. There's actually a pretty good chance we'll eventually see Willem Dafoe come back as Green Goblin at some point in the MCU. Like I said though, during the end credits, they have a bunch of comic book panels with artwork from the series made to look like actual comic book artwork, just like Steve Ditko's designs, but much closer to Steve Ditko's designs, like actual comic book animation. Episode 2 then is called The Parker Luck, which is reference to a couple things from the comics. They discussed the Parker Luck many times in the comics. He even had a comic book run that was referred to as Parker Luck. The intro is pretty much the same, but they added Norman Osborn just because they added him in this episode. So like they're adding things slowly to the intros in the end credits based on the new characters they introduce each time. When he says he's been looking at local high schools for candidates, that also might be for his experiments because Butane's gear later in the episode also has Oscorp logos all over it. So I think part of the idea is that Norman Osborn isn't looking for candidates out of the goodness of his heart, he's just looking for test subjects, and Spider-Man's potential for power, wanting to exploit him as opposed to Iron Man, is like the next step. Like he wants to get Spider-Man next. So the whole twist here is that the mentor relationship is way darker. Like this will not end well for Spider-Man. You will definitely end up fighting this person while they're wearing Goblin armor. Maybe he goes full Green Goblin by the end of the series, we'll see about that. The whole internship is also meant to be a play on Iron Man's excuse that he gave Aunt May so that she would let him come to the airport battle, basically do a bunch of Avengers stuff with them. Later though, they eventually did make a fake internship photo shoot to commemorate it, which Iron Man used as a memento of Spider-Man after his death in Infinity War. You notice later though, Nico has already clocked that Norman Osborn is sus, very correctly too, like she's right on the money there. All the talk about digging in his backyard, buried skeletons, probably a literal thing in the comics, but also probably foreshadowing for the Sinister Six and like all the crazy villains that we see during the series. Would not be surprised if a lot of them get their tech from Oscorp, because a lot of them are classic Sinister Six villains. She also mentions Roxxon Oil, which is a natural resources company in the MCU and in the comics. They've been featured on a ton of different TV series and a ton of different movies too. They are very, very evil. When he goes to Oscorp Tower, Gallo J is a reference to John Gallo in the comics, who becomes the Ricochet character. The whole ID badge is also meant to be a comp to Tom Holland's ID badge on his passport that we see a couple times in the MCU. If you're talking about general Spider-Man Easter eggs though, Spider-Man did try to get an internship at Oscorp inside the Andrew Garfield Amazing Spider-Man universe. Gwen Stacy also worked there too. When he goes to the lab upstairs, Amadeus Cho, who's much older than Peter in this universe, seems like he might eventually become the Hulk at some point. I think they just want to leave that as an open possibility, but maybe not this season. Asha is a character from the comics. She's from Wakanda. She does get powers, and she has the ability to absorb light. She can turn invisible. She can shoot laser beams. Jean is actually Taskmaster's daughter in the comics, the original comic book Taskmaster. She also becomes the Finesse character eventually, so we'll see if she eventually gets powers too. Their leader is Bentley Whitman, who becomes the Wizard character in the comics, who's an old Fantastic Four villain, meaning that we might get some more Fantastic Four Easter eggs in future seasons once they debut in the MCU. Usually they try to do stuff in live action before they do it in animation, which is why I don't expect a ton of Fantastic Four characters to be running around this season. He makes a Hawkeye joke because remember, the Avengers are big celebrities inside this universe and in the MCU. Amadeus Cho gets sent to the robotics department. Better build a goblin Hulkbuster, probably going to come in handy later when he turns into the Hulk. Peter winds up working with this universe's version of the Lizard, Carla Connors, who's in energy research, not biotech, and their big mission is to develop a clone of Stark Industries' repulsor technology. I love the way that Peter also calls that out too, like, oh, just like Iron Man's repulsor technology. She's like, yeah, exactly like that. He patented it, so we have to make our own version of it. Basically telling him that Norman Osborn wants to rip off Iron Man with his own version of the tech, which is kind of the way it goes down in the comics too. There are a couple of funny moments with Peter just nerding out big time, like he doesn't know his sports ball because he makes a whole bunch of basketball references when they're asking about the football game. Crusher Hogan here on TV is a reference to Spider-Man's origin story in the comics. We also saw him in live action during Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, played by Randy Savage. He winds up fighting the villain Butane at the fire, who's a total idiot and winds up burning down the wrong building because he's so dumb. When he saves the dog and calls it Spider Dog, Peter does adopt a stray dog in the comics, but he winds up naming that one Sandwich. When he says his next suit needs to be fireproof, pretty much all of his comic book suits are tuned for specific villains based on what their abilities are. When he clocks that Butane got his tech from Oscorp but doesn't say anything about it yet, that'll probably come back in a future episode when they start working with Norman Osborn on his new suits. Like, by the way, I'm seeing all this Oscorp tech showing up with all these different villains all over the city. Are you connected to that for some reason, Norman Osborn? Pretty easy to assume the answer is probably yes. My assumption when it comes to that kind of stuff, though, is that we won't see any actual Sinister Six form, like for real, until like a future season. They might just tease that later this season. When he summons Peter to his office is because he finally saw evidence of him putting the Spider-Man costume on with the security cams and confronts him with it like, oh, so you are Spider-Man. It's meant to be a comp to Iron Man telling him the same thing with the footage that he found. There are also a couple other Easter eggs too. On the way to his office, he sees the picture that he has with Captain America, and notice it's a newer version of his suit. My assumption is that Oscorp might supply some of the Avengers gear, but probably not all of it because Iron Man mostly builds all the Avengers gear. Oscorp does have a lot of military, a lot of government contracts though, so they do work a lot with the US government. So the whole idea of this end tag scene here is that Norman Osborn knows his secret and he's not that surprised by it, like, oh, so it's you, you're the guy. Okay, well, we're gonna do a lot of great stuff together. This is also probably right before this scene here where he opens up his wall and shows him all of his secret tech, like, we're gonna do great things together in a really dark connotation, like, oh, I'm gonna have you do all kinds of shady stuff. That'll probably be the beginning of episode 3. But during these end credits, this time they update them with the butane character, but notice Spider-Man's jacket is different in this scene. My guess is this is just concept art that they did early for the series, then when they finally got to actually animating it, they just changed it so it looked like it did during the actual episode. But if there's any other Easter eggs or references that you spotted during the episodes that I didn't talk about in the video, just write them below in the comments. What they're actually doing with the show is they're basically binge dropping it in a couple weeks before Daredevil Born Again starts. I think because they don't want this to get in the way of Daredevil Born Again, they just want people to lock in on Daredevil when those episodes start. The really big reminder is that there's 3 episodes next week instead of just 2 episodes, so be sure to watch them all. I'll do a single video for all of them and post that on Wednesday like I would normally do. There are a couple other videos that I'm working on right now too, but everyone click here for that big Wolverine announcement to learn what's happening with him the next couple of years, and click here for my brand new Superman trailer. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.